Welcome to this Asia Global podcast, brought to you by the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host, Alejandro Reyes, the Institute's Director of Knowledge Dissemination. In our programs here in Hong Kong and online, and in the content that we produce, we focus on presenting Asian perspectives on global issues. This podcast is part of our Meet the Author series, where we have a conversation with contributors to Asia Global Online and other publications of the Institute. Joining me now from Manila is Renato Cruz de Castro. Renato Cruz de Castro is a professor in the International Studies Department at De La Salle University, Manila, where he holds the Dr. Aurelio Calderon Chair in Philippine-American Relations. He earned his PhD in 2001 as a Fulbright Scholar in the Government and International Studies Department of the University of South Carolina. He has a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees from the University of the Philippines. As a member of the Board of Trustees of the Strat-based ADR, Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ADRI, he writes opinion columns for the Business World and Philippine Star newspapers here in the Philippines. His articles on international relations and security are regularly published in academic and think tank journals around the world, including Asia Global Institute's Asia Global Online. His research interests include Philippine-US security relations and Philippine defense and foreign policy. So Rene, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Al. Thank you very much for the honor.
No, it's lovely to. It's our privilege to have you as our guest. So, in your article, which is still trending on Asia Global Online, you write that when the Philippine Coast Guard spotted more than 200 Chinese fishing boats in the contested Julian Felipe Reef, which is referred internationally as the Whitsun Reef, in March 2021, defense and foreign affairs officials in the Philippines swiftly responded to the Chinese incursion. Missing from the early stages of that developing standoff was the Philippine leader, President Rodrigo Duterte. Now, while President Duterte later backed his minister's firm position against China, he also declared that the 2 countries would settle the standoff peacefully, and has been kind of hot and cold, if you will, on this these gray operations by China in the South China Sea. So tell us a bit about your thoughts on the situation now. That was back in March, and I think observers outside the Philippines, particularly those who may not be intimately aware of the mercurial quality of the president, maybe sort of befuddled, if you will, about the what you call the title of your article in Asia Global Online, sort of a dazed and confused response. How do you account for that? Because it would seem that the feeling in the Philippines, particularly given the strong alliance with the United States, would be very much that the Philippines should sort of counter China.
I think it has to do with the fact that our President Duterte, is really bent on ending his term, pursuing his policy of appeasement, right, which of course began in 2016 when, of course, he became the 15th president of the Philippines. And he basically did a dramatic change when you talk about Philippine foreign policy. Since, of course, the country became independent since 1946, up to the last president before him, his predecessor, President Benigno Aquino III, the policy has been on emphasizing the importance of the alliance. And this has become more emphasized during the time of his predecessor, President Aquino. President Duterte overturned everything. So this is the first time that we have this dramatic engagement with China. So the goal, of course, was to take advantage of China's economic emergence, get some money for his Build program, and basically assume that if the Philippines develops close economic interdependence with China, this would minimize possible clash between the Philippines and the Chinese in the South China Sea. So everyone knows for a fact that the policy has failed, except the president himself. So this is a case of really the president sticking it out,
Right.
probably up to the last day of his term in next year.
So let's unpack that a bit, because of course this whole issue of how to deal with China is something that every country in Southeast Asia, every ASEAN member, but also pretty much every other country in the world has to deal with. And in many ways, it's not just about how you deal with China, but also, as particularly Singapore has made clear, the countries in ASEAN have to kind of make a choice between China and the United States. So you're saying that the appeasement strategy, which was really trying to look at China as a source of economic benefits, financing through the BRI and sort of other projects, that this has failed, that there really hasn't been the benefits that were promised. Talk a bit about that.
Well, when President Duterte went to China in October 2016, President Xi Jinping committed $24 billion for the infrastructure programs. Right now, you only have 2 projects amounting to less than probably 250 million.
Right.
Most of the monies, most of the projects that China committed were either canceled or postponed. So the money did not come. President Duterte promised he would bring home the beef to fund his major infrastructure program. This has not happened. Right. And of course, also in terms of trying to moderate China's behavior in the South China Sea, this has not happened. You still have tension between Chinese forces and, of course, the armed forces of the Philippines stationed in the South China Sea. Every now and then, you have a Chinese warning to a Philippine Air Force reconnaissance plane. You have an incident that happened last year where you have a People's Liberation Army's Navy's frigate pointing its gun controls director against a Philippine Navy ship, the BRP Conrado yacht. Okay. So despite everything that the Duterte administration has done, China seems oblivious to whether you are friendly or not when it comes to pursuing its territorial ambition in the South China Sea. Right. So those are indication of the fact that it failed, the appeasement policy failed. But of course, if President Duterte would admit it, he would basically say, what I have done since 2016 is simply useless. Yes. It did not bring about the promises of this appeasement policy. Nothing happened. Right. In short.
Now, why did these projects not materialize? Was that a problem on the Chinese side? Was it essentially a problem on the Philippine side? Was there
both
mutual
sides.
Issues?
Yeah, both sides. On the one hand, the Chinese are demanding that. Of course, you're familiar with how the Chinese operates when they build an infrastructure project in a country like, for example, the Philippines, Indonesia. Everything, labor, raw materials, construction materials, everything will be coming from China.
Yes, you call it corrosive capital in your
corrosive
piece,
capital, or this, basically how
predatory
predatory
capital. Yes.
So, and the bureaucracy, the National Economic Development Authority, the Department of Trade, the Department of Budget, and the Department of Finance are not simply used to this kind of operation. That money is not given to the Philippines, unlike, of course, when you have the South Koreans or the Japanese or even the Americans. If they have a project here in the Philippines, the money is not tied. It's untied. You can choose any qualified bidders, not in the case of the Chinese.
Right.
It has to be from the Chinese, and not a single cent would leave China. Then at the end of the day, you have to pay China in dollars.
Okay.
So I think this is one of the major reasons why you don't have those projects coming in, those projects in the pipeline, just remaining in the pipeline.
Yes. Now, if I can sort of drill down a little bit more on that, because with all the publicity BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, gets around the world, but certainly in this part of the world, particularly as an infrastructure development initiative, I think people lose sight that, in fact, Japan is still leading in terms of the investment in infrastructure in Southeast Asia. And indeed, Japan's investment in the Philippines is a lot greater, as I understand it.
So,
and the quality of the investment, the quality of the infrastructure projects, they have materialized in contrast to what's happened with BRI.
In the case of the largest and most funded infrastructure project is by Japan, the subway system in Metro Manila, that probably will be completed by 2025.
Yes,
but I think the Japanese has put about my estimate around $450 million in loans, but it's untied. So although I think the construction is being done by the Japanese construction company, but the system, the bidding system is transparent, it's open. Unlike in the case of the Chinese, they'll just give you 3 choices, all of them Chinese companies.
It'll be amazing to have a subway system in Metro Manila. As someone who was born there, I can't even imagine it. It kind of blows my mind to think about that.
We're running from Quezon City, going to the airport in Parañaque.
Yeah. Now let's talk a bit about the U.S. alliance then, because Prime Minister of Singapore, the Foreign Minister of Singapore, and others have talked about Southeast Asia. We don't, China and U.S. don't make us make a choice, right? And in this case, with President Duterte, he's in some ways struggled during his term with the fact that the United States alliance is there, and there's been various agreements, defense treaties and such, and then in his mercurial way, he sort of decided he would cancel the visiting forces arrangements, but then it was back on. Give us some, if it's possible, some sort of clarity on where we are now in terms of how President Duterte is balancing, if he's even trying balancing the China-US sort of relationship.
First of all, I would like to clarify the statement that the Southeast Asian countries do not want to make a choice. They have actually made a choice. They're not just open about it. So the 3 biggest Southeast Asian countries, that of course has also an exposure to their maritime domain. They are basically maritime states. I'm talking about the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. They have already made a choice, although they're not very open about it. They're not, the contrast, of course, to the continental Southeast Asian countries. They also have made a choice. It's not being open about it. Now, going back to the Philippines, again, President Duterte, of course, the goal of President Duterte ever since, of course, he became president in 2016, was to distance, if not break away from the Philippine-US alliance. He has even used a metaphor for this in September 2016. To crossing the Rubicon, which means, of course, cutting our ties with the United States, security primarily, and of course, forging new alliances with Russia and China. That, of course, did not happen in 2016 because the military said, "What do you mean by separation?" We have close relationship with the United States military. It will cause, of course, a lot of problems in terms of logistics, in terms of training, and of course, the military still does not trust China. And it's very important that we maintain the mutual defense treaty because it's the only thing we have in face, of course, of a powerful and, of course, expansionary China in the South China Sea. So you have, eventually, of course, President Duterte realized that the military was not very happy with his announcement that we have to separate from the United States. So he made a 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. He basically said he will not cut our security ties with the United States, but he wants the alliance to be refocused away from maritime security, territorial defense, which is of course euphemism for being directed against China, to counterterrorism, humanitarian assistance, risk reduction, which is focused more on the domestic, away from the China challenge in the South China Sea.
Right.
Well, at least the Philippine military and the United States military went along with this. Until, of course, you have in 2017 the Marawi, the siege of Marawi, or the Battle of Marawi against the Islamic militants that lasted for about 5 months. And then the Philippine military told President Duterte, see, we still need logistic support from the United States, and we need to conduct live fire exercises with the United States military. So the alliance went back to a normal state by 2019. And this, of course, alarmed China. And I guess, when President Duterte visited China in August 2019, where he met, of course, President Xi Jinping, probably President Xi Jinping told him, hey, you're going back to the normal state of the alliance. So the following year, of course, on the excuse that the United States government has canceled the visa of his close friend, Senator De La Rosa, Bato, he abrogated the visiting force agreement. Of course, you have the military who was not very happy because they were expecting more joint exercises. That's the only way that the military could really sharpen the skill. And of course, their interoperability with American forces. There's also the need for American support, especially in terms of intelligence in Mindanao.
Yes.
The U.S. military provides drones and satellite images when the AP would have, or even the Philippine National Police would have to conduct operations in Mindanao. Then, of course, the promise about 200 million in terms of new acquisitions for the Armed Forces of the Philippines. All of them, of course, would be thrown out of the window if the visiting force agreement is, of course, been canceled and abrogated. Then, interestingly, you have a number of Philippine senators questioning and challenging President Duterte's decision to unilaterally abrogate the visiting force agreement without consulting the senators.
Right.
Then, of course, you have actions by China. On February 17, 2020, you have an incident wherein a Chinese People's Liberation Army's Navy's corvette pointed its gun control director against the Philippine Navy ship, the BRP Conrado Yap, which of course shocked the Philippine Navy, the Western Command, and possibly even President Duterte, that despite efforts to be friendly with the Chinese military, you have incidents like this happening.
Right.
So eventually you have 2 series of suspending the for about 6 months the abrogation of the visiting force agreement until last February, where you have again a renegotiation. So there's supposed to already be a renegotiated document, and everyone expecting that President Duterte would make a decision whether or not he would sign a renegotiating visiting force agreement.
Right.
So until now, of course, President Duterte has not made clear what will be his decision.
Right.
So again, a problem. Yeah. Okay.
No. So in fact, there are many things to unpack here, because with China, it almost seems like, to bring up a kind of American metaphor to the cartoon strip Peanuts, it's a kind of Lucy with the football situation where there's always something that keeps on
Charlie
happening.
Brown.
The Charlie Brown issue. And indeed, the Philippines has been armed with the arbitral ruling from the Permanent Court of Arbitration from 2016 in its favor, and yet, it has sort of blown hot and cold as to whether to use that in making its argument. And then with the United States, I think the situation seems to be something kind of visceral for the president, because coming from the South, he's referred many times, as I recall, to atrocities that the U.S. forces back in the turn of the 19th to 20th century might have made in killing Muslims down south, right? I mean, that this is an under-researched part of
I think it's more
American.
personal.
Yeah,
It's
but
not of history.
yeah.
It's
Well,
very more personal.
but it's because it's something very personal for him in that regard.
I think he has personal issues with the Americans,
yes,
even when he was still a mayor of Davao City.
right, right. So
Oh.
is this? I guess it from an outsider's perspective, this looks like a real kind of jumble of
Yeah.
strategy that doesn't really seem to have.
Or if there's a strategy at all.
Right. Well,
there's
that's
a question
it.
whether there's a strategy at
That's
all.
it. In a way, it's very reminiscent of the Trump administration in the U.S., where some folks thought that there wasn't really any policy. It was a kind of go by your gut, go by your instinct.
But
kind
still,
of
you have what
way.
you call what Donald Trump calls the deep state,
Right.
the bureaucracy. So
Right.
you also have here, but not as powerful as compared to the United States, where you have, of
Right.
course, the National Security Council,
Right.
the Department of Defense, the State Department. So you have that, what Donald Trump called the deep state that has been challenging his policies
Right.
regarding alliances, NATO. But you also have its version here in the Philippines.
Right. So then what has happened then with the President Duterte was said to have a very good relationship with President Trump, and that they kind of were simpatico, particularly their
that's good.
styles were somewhat similar, down to the use of social media and the coarseness of language and things like that. Now we have the Biden administration. Well, what has changed, or has anything changed in terms of
I think
the Philippine-U.S. relationship? Sorry, in terms of Philippine-U.S. relationship.
Well, let's go first to when President Trump, former President Trump was still there. They developed a very good personal rapport. So when President Duterte needed American assistance during the siege of Marawi, he got what he wanted.
Right.
Then, of course, when former President Donald Trump visited Manila in November 2017, they went along. I don't think that's the case right now. It's the bureaucracies that's managing this. Secretary Antony Blinken has a good rapport with Secretary Teodoro Locsin. Secretary Austin Lloyd has a good relation with Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, but I haven't heard President Biden giving a call to President Duterte. The last thing I heard, the only thing I heard is that you have the letter that President Biden sent to President Duterte during the height of the Julian Felipe Shoal standoff, that the United States is here, we're offering you assistance. But of course, everyone knows that President Duterte declined American offer of assistance during the height of the standoff with China. So I don't know how this has affected his relationship with President Joe Biden. I don't think the personal rapport between the two executives are there anymore.
Do you think this will come to a head? I mean, Biden has talked about his wanting to have a kind of summit of democracies by the end of the year. And of course, they're the usual countries that would get invited. There's many of the G7, of course, the G7 countries. But then there are the test cases that people are already talking about.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Do you invite Turkey? Do you invite
Thailand?
Thailand. Do you invite the Philippines? I mean, do you think this is something that could come to a head in terms of does the U.S. still recognize the Philippines as a democracy?
Well, I think it will depend on the dynamics inside the Biden administration cabinet. I don't know if you've noticed. On March 3, 2021, the administration came out with the interim national strategic guidelines.
Yes.
Singapore is mentioned there. Vietnam is mentioned there. The Philippines and Thailand were not mentioned.
Right.
So I asked my American friends what accounts for this. They said dynamics within the administration. Right. So it will again depend on the dynamics there. You'll have some people who say that the Philippines should be included, and you will have people that would say no, the Philippines is not anymore a democracy. But whether the Philippines will get invited or not, I don't think President Duterte couldn't care less.
Right.
If he will get an invitation, I don't think he will go to the United States.
Right.
He simply doesn't care
Right.
about the alliance with the United States in particular and our overall relationship with the United States. For him, it's only our relationship with China that matters.
Right. And yet, the appeasement strategy, it would seem unlikely to start working before the next election. I mean, the next election in the Philippines is already less than a year away. And assuming the president sticks to his guns, he's unlikely to kind of get the benefits in this short period.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Yeah, that's a challenge for a one-term president, and of course, a president that has a very strong personality,
Yes.
and that, of course, is considered as using Max Weber's term, charismatic authority.
Right.
Usually, you have regimes or administrations like this. It's just a one-shot deal. This whoever would be probably his daughter is thinking of running, Sara Duterte. If just in case she becomes president, I don't think she will inherit that charisma or that strong personality of his father.
Right.
So it will be entirely different ball game
Right.
after June 2022.
Right. And I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything like that, but how are the elections sort of shaping up, do you think, in the sense that especially if you look at what happened in the United States, where there was clearly some Trump fatigue, even among those who might have supported him before. Is there going to be sort of Duterte fatigue in terms of we just want someone a little bit more normal, or what are your thoughts on where we're heading from a foreign policy perspective?
Okay.
I think.
One thing is clear: the grand coalition of President Duterte is breaking up.
Right.
You have somebody who's very important, who's very popular, who has already indicated he's breaking up with his coalition. He happened, of course, to be the president of the political party of the president, PDP Laban. And
Right.
it's no less than, of course, Manny Pacquiao, Senator Manny Pacquiao,
Right.
who criticized him for in his handling of the Winston Scholl standoff, and has already indicated he's running to run for the presidency.
Yes.
So this will mean a breakup in the coalition party, under that coalition. Then you have a group that was formed, Isang Bayan, that's what they call it, Sambayanan, formed by former Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio of the Supreme Court and former Foreign Affairs Secretary Albert Del Rosario.
Right.
They're about to anoint a candidate that's supposed to represent the entire opposition. Of course, the $1,000 question here is that will this hold until next year?
Right.
If the opposition will have one candidate. If the opposition can field a single candidate for the president and, of course, the vice president, there is a chance that you will see the end, even before it had started, of the Duterte dynasty.
Right.
Here in the Philippines.
But here's a kind of devil's advocate question: could that group? I mean, if you think about Justice Carpio and Ambassador Del Rosario, well, sorry, he was actually Secretary Del Rosario at one point. It's almost like they could put up a candidate in the vein of a kind of technocratic candidate that doesn't appeal to the.
I don't think they will choose somebody,
polity, right?
Yeah.
On the ground. I mean, it's like a Mar Rojas figure, if I can put it that way.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they will choose somebody, definitely not a technocrat, because there's no chance
right.
that you will have a technocrat winning in Philippine politics.
Right.
They will try to look for somebody who's new.
Right.
So that's the only fighting chance they have. If they can pick someone who's new and someone who will, of course, represent the opposite, an antithesis of Duterte.
Right.
And that person will have a fighting chance on preventing a Duterte dynasty.
And could that be kind of like a, in other words, could the Philippines go the way the United States did and go to a Biden kind of figure?
Biden is actually Biden actually represented the old.
Yes.
In the case of the
Although he's seems to be trying
he
to be a little more
represented what
progressive.
we consider the establishment. Actually, he was establishment figure
Right.
against the newcomer.
Right.
So what here in the case of the Philippines, you actually need a newcomer who's the antithesis, the direct opposite of President Duterte, but still a newcomer.
Yeah. And
so
are there such candidates?
You have a lot of new politicians here.
Right. Okay. Well, Isco is one of those that people talk about, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, right. I won't put you in the spot further, but
I'm not privy to what they've been discussing. I'm just an academic, just studying politics. I'm not involved in politics.
Well, speaking of that, what are you working on these days? You were just telling me before we went online that you're celebrating your 30th year.
Well, I'm at a crossroads whether I would continue. Yeah.
Right. So
because I'm set. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
I'm, the faculty manual, the La Salle faculty manual provides that once a faculty member reaches the age of 30, then it's time for him to go.
Right.
So there's a chance that De La Salle University might extend me as a tenured faculty member, or might offer me an adjunct faculty. Move on.
Right. Now, what sort of research work are you doing right now? Are there any things
I'm still focused on the Philippine-U.S. security relation.
Right.
I'm focused on that. Three of my recent researches are focused.
Where do you see things heading then, particularly as they've been so fluid of late? Do you think that they'll stabilize? Do you think?
I'm an optimist generally when it comes to the alliance.
Right.
I'm expecting that once the Duterte factor is gone, everything might stabilize. Even, let's say, if his daughter will become the next president, I don't think he will be as rabidly anti-American as her father.
Right. Right. Because as you said, for him it was quite personal. It had become quite personal.
Personal, yeah.
Right. Now, tell us a bit about the influence of the pandemic on all of this. How do you see, first of all, I mean, with China, we've talked about, many people talk about vaccine diplomacy, and I know that the Chinese vaccines have become available in the Philippines. Has that had any impact on the Philippine-China relationship?
I guess so. I think China earned some cookie points by being able to provide the vaccine. At the time, of course, the United States and Europe are simply focused on vaccinating their own population. This created an image of an altruistic China, as of course offering its vaccine to people who have no access to Western vaccines. So that's a challenge, of course, for the United States of whether it could undo. Definitely could not undo what China had earned, but basically offer better vaccine. And of course, in the case of the United States, everyone seemed to have forgotten here that the vaccines that are being used here had been bought from China.
Right.
Some, of course, were donated, but many of them, of course, were bought by the Philippine government.
Right.
So the challenge for the United States is to offer a more effective vaccine for free.
Right.
And of course, this when the Pfizer vaccine arrived here, you have mobs in malls where you have the vaccination being conducted. In one mall, you have people basically asking that they just be vaccinated with Pfizer because they don't trust the Chinese vaccines.
Right. So the vaccine diplomacy that Beijing has put forward, has that at all mitigated the issue over South China Sea or the
not to that degree, but it earned China some cookie points.
Right.
I talked to a number of doctors who are very grateful that China has provided those vaccines.
Right.
One of them happened to be my brother.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I remember talking to one of my aunts who had just received the vaccine, and it was the, I think, Sinopharm vaccine. And I asked her whether she had had a choice, and no, she said that this was all that was available at the time
Yeah,
she
ma'am.
got vaccinated, and that she had thought that she might hang on for one
Yeah.
of the Western options, but then her physician said, no, 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 just take this one. And she was perfectly, in
Yeah,
the
that's the
end,
advice of
happy
most
to do
doctors
it.
here.
All
The
right.
best vaccine is, of course, available. We hope that, of course, the United States and the European Union could provide the Filipinos with better choices.
Right. And the Philippines is also getting vaccines through the COVAX
COVAX,
facility.
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah,
Right.
they got Pfizer,
Right.
AstraZeneca through the
AstraZeneca,
COVAX facility,
COVAX.
and the private sector has bought Moderna
Right.
Moderna
Right.
vaccine that are set to arrive this month.
Ah, okay. Yes.
So
Interesting. Now, in general, how has the Philippines been faring through the pandemic? You're working from some isolation,
yep.
as I understand it, and this has been going
Schools
on
are
for over a
still,
year.
yeah,
Yeah.
universities are not yet operating.
Yeah.
You have some businesses that have started to operate. I think the priority now of the government is the economy.
Right.
After you have another lockdown a couple of months ago,
Right.
that lasted for about a month from March to April,
Right.
especially in the national capital region, and of course it's the provinces
Right.
near the national capital region. They had this very rigid lockdown,
Right.
but not as rigid as last year.
And how have the numbers? How are the numbers now in terms
About
of
7,000 to 5,000 every day.
right?
So
And
we still
and
have.
but folks are a little bit more relaxed, or is it still
It's a matter of what can we do about it. I
right?
would use the term, bordering on being fatalistic. What can we do about it?
Right.
We only have one choice for vaccine, and that's Sinovac. We're only giving information through the presidential spokesperson. So what can we do about it?
Right. So let me close by just asking you, personally, how have you coped with during the pandemic, the fact that you're teaching virtually, you're doing pretty much all your work virtually, and it's limited travel. I mean, we met
No travel at all.
we met a couple of years ago, actually, a few years, well, more than a couple now. It's a
Yeah,
few years ago.
2018.
We met in the UK, and you were kind of in some ways quite a frequent traveler, and
Well,
it's changed, right?
I haven't traveled in the last since the pandemic began in March.
Right.
So I'm looking forward. I'm assuming that the new normal will be a return back.
Right.
After the pandemic is over, people will try to forget what happened. Everyone will simply be looking forward.
Right.
So there's still the optimist in me.
And have you coped pretty well with all the virtual teaching? What is your assessment of virtual teaching online?
It will be a good in terms of technology. I have really become a bit techie savvy when it comes to teaching, using Canvas, using Zoom. So this will be great once we go back to person teaching.
Right.
I could rely on these technologies.
Now, the Philippines is not renowned for having such advanced internet. At least I hear from my cousins a lot of complaints about internet service. Has that been a problem in the Philippines in terms of the lack of broadband? Right.
It had been improved ever since President Duterte threatened Globe and Smart with expropriation.
Right.
And the threat of bringing in a third telecompany. So I think this push the two telecommunication companies to at least improve their services. Not everything's so bad here in the Philippines.
No, for sure not. But certainly in this case, the strongman tactic has worked to some extent.
Yeah, to a certain, yeah.
Well,
okay, yeah, sure. Make the most of the situation.
Right, indeed. Well,
that's how you survive here in the Philippines. Make the most out of the bad situation.
Yes.
Everything is a matter of lesser evil.
This is basically what I learned very young when I was very young living in the Philippines. That you
So
needed,
once you travel abroad, once you
right,
decide to stay in a developed country, then you learn to appreciate a lot of things.
certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. Well,
That's also what I experienced when I studied in the States. Yeah,
yes,
every time I go to the States, you
yes,
learn to appreciate everything that's there.
right. But of course, as for me, I mean, at the end of the day, the Philippines is where family is. Then
Yeah.
you always come back in some
Yeah.
ways.
And at the end of the day, it's, there's no place like home.
Yes, indeed. So on that note, Renee, it's been really a pleasure to have you as our guest. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining us. I commend Renee's article and articles on Asia Global Online. Please visit the website Asia Global Online or the Asia Global Institute website and sign up to receive our email announcements and information, and follow us on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. You guys know the drill. So thank you again, Renee. It's been a pleasure to
Till my
connect with
next
you.
assignment, till
Yeah,
my next
well,
writing assignment from Asia Global Institute.
yeah, anytime. We're always
Okay.
happy to publish your pieces. So thank you again.
Okay. It's a pleasure and honor
Yeah,
meeting you and being given a chance to publish in Asia Global Institute.
great.
Have a great day.
You too.
Okay. See you here in Manila.
I hope so sometime soon.